In this episode of How to Cut Footage Like a Pro, I'm going to show you how children's books like this one can help you tell better stories through video editing. Let's take a look. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to the J-Cuts community. All of the people listed here are members of my channel and have access to things like live editing training, daily tips and tricks, free presets, and more access to me in my private Facebook group. If you want to join the J-Cuts community, just click the join button below this video or in the description and sign up to become a member. Okay, let's recap the series so far. In the first video, we talked about Walter Murch's rule of 6, where we discussed the most important things to keep in mind while editing a video, with emotion being the most important and 3D space of action being the least important. Next, we took a look at how to cut footage with the emotion of the video at the forefront of our mind. Admittedly, this didn't go over as well as I had hoped, which was totally my fault. Understanding how to preserve emotion is ambiguous enough, and I didn't really dive deep enough into it. Sorry about that. Hopefully this video will make up for it. By the way, if you missed either of those videos, the playlist is linked below. You should definitely check that out. Today we're going to talk about storytelling. Now, as easy as you might think this is to explain and understand, it's not. It's almost as ambiguous as emotion, actually, but that's why I brought visual aids. More on that later. I guess the easiest place to start is to actually explain what a story is. According to dictionary.com, does anyone actually use the book version of the dictionary anymore? Let me know in the comments. Story is defined as a narrative, either true or fictitious, in prose or verse, designed to interest, amuse, or instruct the hearer or reader. Pretty simple, right? Basically, if I'm telling you about something that happened, I'm telling you a story. Now, most stories are constructed in a 3-act narrative, also known as a story arc, most commonly defined as beginning, middle, and end. Every story has this. And contained within that story arc, there is usually an underlying problem or setup, a conflict, and a resolution. But those aren't the only components of a story. You also have characters, usually a protagonist and an antagonist. Side note, neither the protagonist or the antagonist have to be people. They just have to be two things that are in conflict with each other. Think about nature films. There's also the setting of the story, the tone of the story, and the plot. Now, I want to dive into plot a little bit because more times than not, if you're losing your audience somewhere in the video, it's in the plot. And that's usually because a lot of people confuse plot for story or think that they're the same thing. And in case you were wondering, they're not the same thing. To quote Janet Burroway, who is paraphrasing E.M. Forster, story is a series of events recorded in their chronological order, and plot is a series of events arranged deliberately so as to reveal their dramatic, thematic, and emotional significance. In order to really understand this and to understand how all of this works together, let's stop thinking about your next video as a video and start thinking about it as, I don't know, a children's book. This is Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. It's my favorite children's book. Alexander is basically me as a kid with different colored hair. Now, I'm going to explain the story and the plot to you without any B-roll or cutaways because I want you to spot the difference in my delivery of each. First, here's the story. Alexander is a kid who wakes up in a bad mood. Throughout the day, things keep going wrong and he keeps getting more and more frustrated. And then at the end of the day, his mom tells him that sometimes days are like that. The end. You see what happened there? The story was there, it was easy to understand, but it had no antagonist, really, no dramatic significance. It was just boring. Now, here's the plot. Warning, if you haven't read this, there will be spoilers. Here we go. Alexander woke up with gum in his hair, tripped over a skateboard, dropped his favorite sweater in the sink, and right away he knew it was going to be a bad day. And he was right. He didn't get a prize in his cereal box. He got stuck in the middle seat on the way to school. Even though he gets car sick, he got in trouble at school. His best friend ditched him at recess. There was no dessert in his lunchbox, and that was just school. After school, he had to go to the dentist. The dentist found a cavity. The door to the dentist's office closed on his foot. His brother pushed him into the mud and then called him a crybaby, so he punched his brother and then got in trouble for it. And when he tried telling people he was having a bad day, nobody even listened. I mean, this kid was ready to move to Australia. Then, on top of all of that, the shoe store didn't have the shoes he wanted. He accidentally destroyed his dad's office. He had to eat lima beans at dinner. His bath was too hot. He had to wear pajamas that he didn't like. And the cat wanted to sleep with his brother instead of him. I mean, this kid was really ready to move to Australia. And you know what his mom said when she came in to say goodnight? Some days are like that, even in Australia. Now, there are a couple things that happened here. First, the plot introduced the antagonist, which in this case was just life in general. That alone made it a more interesting story. But more importantly, if we were to look at the book as a video and each page as a cut in the footage, you'll notice that the plot doesn't stray from the story. Each cut moves the story along in a meaningful way, and that is how to preserve story in a video. Every time you make a cut in your footage, every time you are considering whether or not to keep a scene, ask yourself, what is the story, and does this cut add to it, take away from it, or distract the audience from it? If this footage does anything other than add to the story, it has to go. Now, there is one caveat to that, and that has to do with character development. Sometimes you have more than one protagonist, and in order to effectively tell the main story, you have to give each protagonist their own little subplot. You'll also find yourself doing the same for any antagonists in the story. Each main character has to have depth and meaning in order for the main story to have any kind of dramatic significance. The key here is to make sure not to get lost in the subplot. Don't go so far down the rabbit hole with character development that the video becomes about the character instead of the story itself. This takes time and practice to get right, and it probably deserves its own video, but I wanted to mention it here for anyone who was wondering. Another thing that happened when I explained the plot was I was able to properly convey the emotion of the story. Without the emotion, the story was boring and unmemorable. With the emotion, the story was complete, and that is why emotion is the most important thing to keep in mind while editing. Ha! We went full circle. To learn more about that, click here. And for more tools, tips, and tricks that will make you a better video editor, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell so you don't miss anything. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.